I'm going to welcome Patrick to the stage. Patrick's actually been at Google since 2011, and he leads the cloud healthcare and life sciences engineering team. Their team helps customers in healthcare and life sciences industries use cloud AI to improve care efficiency and quality. Thank you, Kesha. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Let me see if I can figure out how to work this. How do I advance here? Does this? Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Super excited to be in the Warsaw office today and talking a little bit about what we're doing in the healthcare and life sciences space. So this is going to be maybe a little bit different from some of the other talks in that not everything that we do is AI, because we actually find in the healthcare space, a lot of our customers need help with their basic IT to get their data ready for AI. So I'll be talking about both of those sides and also be talking about some opportunities that we're going to have coming up in the office here. Oh, let's see how to work this. Is this supposed to work? Sorry.
Incorporate.
No.
Sorry.
I can just use this too.
Yeah.
Do I just go here? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so just to briefly motivate here, so Google is actually in a really unique position to really have an impact in the healthcare and life sciences space and to really help pretty much the entire world to like be healthier and have access to all the healthcare information that they need. Probably most of you have done this. I certainly have done this many times. I mean, users come to Google properties all the time to look for health information in various ways. So that's certainly one asset that we have. In addition, also, Google as an organization and Alphabet, our parent company, invests heavily in the healthcare and life sciences space across many different groups, whether that's Fitbit, that helps you with kind of devices to kind of track your activity habits. There's a wealth of different research groups that are working on healthcare research, especially lots of healthcare AI research, and there's some really cutting edge stuff there. Yeah, so the list goes on, and it's really nice that we're kind of sitting on a wealth of research and a wealth of assets available to us. So for us as cloud, we're focusing on a particular segment of this. We're not focusing on necessarily consumer-facing things. Our main business is in helping the organizations that deliver healthcare in the broadest sense, helping those organizations to be more efficient and ultimately provide better outcomes for their patients. And the way we're doing that is by bringing AI and by also bringing some analytics capabilities to these customers in a way that's responsible and, of course, respectful of all the privacy implications of healthcare data and kind of like is easy for them to use. So our customers, more specifically, range pretty much the entire span of the industry. So starting from healthcare providers, these are like your hospitals or networks of hospitals, clinics, et cetera, to kind of the whole payer segment. So these are your health insurance companies, et cetera, pharmaceutical and life sciences industry, but also companies that manufacture things like medical devices. So roughly, the efforts that we're working on this team are sort of grouped into three broad areas. At the bottom here, you've kind of got the whole segment of data management. And this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier a little bit. Like, this is kind of like where we get the data into kind of the right shape so that customers can really make sense of it at scale, whether that's through AI or otherwise. So this is yeah, a surprisingly challenging problem, and I'll talk a little bit more about like what some of those challenges are in a second. Then, of course, on top of that, AI is a big and growing area. So we've got some really cutting-edge models here that we have been working on together with our research colleagues to really, yeah, give the best possible understanding of that data. And we're also packaging up some of this functionality in APIs that are, yeah, easy to use for customers that maybe aren't coming at this from a very high level of sophistication dealing with AI tools just yet. But we also, and that's kind of the yellow box you see here, we also have a significant investment in the analytics side of things. So even just kind of like being able to kind of like ask SQL queries over all their data at scale is actually something that's surprisingly helpful for healthcare customers. And for that segment, I mean, yeah, we're relying a lot on kind of the capabilities in cloud, like BigQuery and Looker. So let's talk a little bit, let's kind of start from the bottom here from what I showed you in the blue on the previous slide, which is the kind of data management aspect. So our efforts in that area are centered around our healthcare data engine family of products. So what does Healthcare Data Engine do? It's essentially a layer that allows us to interoperate between different systems in the healthcare space, and also has built-in support for some very common healthcare standards that a lot of the data is already in. It's designed to be as developer-friendly and easy to use as possible, because again, not all of our customers are necessarily experts at dealing with this, so we need to make it as approachable as we can. Security and compliance, I mean, it's important for all of cloud, but in the healthcare space especially, it's really absolutely important. This is probably one of the most sensitive types of data that we deal with as a company, so it's really important that, yeah, we do this in a responsible way and in a way that keeps the data safe. And then ultimately what we're trying to get to here is, yeah, unlock the value of this data by bringing it to things like powerful analytics and increasingly and importantly, all the amazing AI capabilities that are coming up. So let's maybe do a short deep dive here into what are some of the common formats that we're seeing, what are the common standards that we're supporting. So I just put 3 examples on the slide here. So these are all standards that are widely used in the healthcare industry that we actually have native support for in our Healthcare Data Engine product. So starting from the left here, and this is something that looks really ugly, and that's kind of on purpose. HL7 v2 is sort of the legacy way for exchanging structured healthcare information. So whenever a patient is admitted to the hospital, whenever a procedure is ordered, whenever a lab result comes back, it typically generates one of these hideous messages. And we essentially have created a way for ingesting these kind of messages into cloud, and then also massaging them into kind of formats that are a bit easier to work with, because yeah, this is, I think, a standard that dates back many decades, and it kind of shows. In the middle here, you've got FHIR, which is probably the most common and much more modern version of this kind of standard. So this is a resource-based representation of patients and all the data pertaining to patients. This is kind of the standard that a lot of our mechanisms for dealing with structured data are built around. So we'll come back to this standard in a little bit later. And then on the right, you'll see DICOM, which is the standard that we're using for dealing with medical imaging data, and of course all the metadata that pertains to that. So that's all your X-rays, CTs, things like pathology slices that get scanned in, and the list goes on and on. So it should be a pretty easy story, right? So we have these nice standards, and we have native support for it, so it should be super easy for a healthcare customer to kind of just plug in their systems, and all the data magically moves into cloud. Well, unfortunately, that's not the whole story. Healthcare IT is frankly like a bit of a mess in many instances, and customers often have their data split across many different systems, many different formats. There's lots of customization, lots of proprietary things. So they need a lot of help in actually getting the data into at least one of these standards, into a kind of a format that they can make sense of it. So that's where kind of the other side of the Healthcare Data Engine product comes in, and where we help customers essentially harmonize their data into a more sane format. So there's a couple of steps to this. Basically what we do is we kind of go one source at a time, and we map it from whatever source format it happens to be, and we map it into this FHIR standard. And then we essentially end up with FHIR representations of all these different sources, but they actually have data about overlapping population of patients. So we also need to, in a second step, what we call reconciliation, we need to also make sure we find these overlapping pieces of data, we match them together, and we kind of produce kind of a hopefully coherent view of the world. So I'm probably not going to go into too much detail here. So here are maybe a couple of examples. So here's that first mapping step where maybe, okay, you need to, in this example, you have some relational tables as a source data, where you're looking at maybe a patient table and an address table, and you need to kind of like figure out, okay, you need to pull information from both of those places to populate ultimately what will be the patient resource in FHIR on the right. And then another brief example here on the reconciliation step. Yeah, so now you've got kind of 2 patient resources that actually refer to the same patient, but they sort of have overlapping information on them. So we need to figure out, okay, is this the same person? We need to kind of, yeah, essentially merge the information into a coherent view. So that's what happens in the second step. Obviously glossing over lots of details here in the interest of time. We broadly have 2 approaches for doing this. There's sort of the old way of doing it, which is sort of a manual code-based way, where we actually have customers, or more commonly kind of integration partners, working with customers, going in and essentially manually crafting some of these rules for mapping the data. That's, as you can imagine, a pretty big lift for customers up front, and takes a long time. So increasingly we're moving over to kind of the view on the right here, where we have a fairly sophisticated IDE that we actually inherited from a research team within Google that can really streamline that process, right? It allows you to kind of quickly browse the data, browse the distributions, and just very quickly like connect things up and map the data into the right schema. And that's also where I think there's a huge opportunity to bring Gen AI directly into this process as well, to kind of automate some of this mapping process and also make it possible to expand it to other types of data beyond kind of the structured data examples that I've shown you here. So that's kind of the data story. So let's maybe move up to what you were seeing as the green before, which is kind of the AI side of the house. So the first thing I want to mention here is MetaLM, which is really the most cutting edge and centerpiece of the AI offering that we have right now. So MetaLM is essentially, we've heard a lot about Gemini and a lot about our amazing foundation models earlier. So MetaLM is essentially a healthcare flavored version of that, or a version that's been specifically tuned on healthcare data. So this has been a great collaboration between us on the cloud side and our research partners within Google. Also resulted in some interesting publications in case anybody's interested. But really what we've done here is we've taken a Gemini model and we've tuned it for some specific healthcare use cases. And that includes things like answering questions, maybe about a particular patient or about a particular case, or even just general medical knowledge questions. These things are actually so sophisticated, they can even pass things like medical licensing exams, which is interesting. It can also do really good summarization of cases, which is really helpful because often physicians have to sift through lots and lots of data for a given patient. But it can also look at things like imaging data, right? It can classify things like chest x-rays to see, okay, is there a particular condition that's present here? So lots of amazing technical capabilities here. Of course, and that maybe goes without saying, but I want to make it explicit nevertheless. This is not at a stage yet where it's replacing physicians, nor do I think that's imminent. But it's really something that can help make them much more efficient, and can really kind of accelerate the way we develop healthcare. So that's kind of on the model capability side. One thing we found is that if you give customers these models just kind of like as is, it's actually very challenging for a lot of customers to use. So one thing that we've done is we've taken some of this AI functionality and we've packaged it up as sort of an shrink-wrapped API that is much easier for customers to get started with. So we've kind of chosen a few use cases, and that's of course an expanding list where we can, where customers can use us without really needing to know any of the details of the model behind the scenes. And that's been, I think, a model that resonates with a lot of our customers. So just to give you some examples of the applications here, it's things like de-identification. So let's say a customer has some healthcare data and they want to remove personal identifiers from it, maybe because they want to give it to some internal researchers within their organization. Or things like natural language processing, which is primarily around like extracting some structure from doctors' notes. A lot of like healthcare data just exists in sort of like, long form notes created by providers. But also things like the summarization use case, right? So let's say you want to have a summary of a patient that's about to get discharged, so we can provide some functionality that can summarize that. Just a few kind of like more horizontal comments here that I want to make in addition to this. Obviously, and I said this at the beginning, healthcare data is very, very sensitive. So we have all the kind of security and compliance certifications that are required for dealing with that. And those, of course, vary from geography to geography. In the US, it's HIPAA. There's many equivalents of this around the world. And we have a growing list of things that we support here. Data residency, I know this is a big topic in Europe, is another one that we support. So if you're a healthcare customer in the EU, for instance, generally, you're going to be required to keep your healthcare data within data centers in this location. So that's something that we're able to support as well by kind of having multiple copies of our services in various locations. And importantly, and I think this applies to all of cloud, the data that goes into these services is controlled by the customer. So the customer gets to decide what it's used for. It doesn't become free training data for us. I just want to be very explicit about that. So let's talk a little bit about the engineering team and about some of the exciting opportunities that we have coming up here. So right now, we have our engineering efforts primarily happening in our office in Waterloo, Canada, which is where I usually spend most of my time. But excitingly, we're actually setting up a second site for the team here in Warsaw, Poland. And we've hired one person here already who is in the room today with us today. Welcome, Wojciech. Our goal here is to actually set up a team of over 10 engineers here already, and I'm hoping that that number will continue to grow. We're going to initially start here with the problem space of kind of the data harmonization side. Again, making that more streamlined, automating it using Gen AI, and then really connecting that data to all the interesting AI use cases that we're already thinking about and many future ones. So we're looking actually for a fairly broad set of skills for this team. So any kind of, there's a front-end component, there's some back-end components, like there's components related to data pipelines. I think we're interested in people that are familiar with cloud. Obviously, if you have healthcare experience, that's highly relevant for us, or life sciences experience, even experience from other regulated industries like financial services. Like we find there's often a lot of overlap between that and healthcare. And of course, yeah, any kind of Gen AI experience is super valuable to us as well. So if this sounds at all interesting, would love to connect, whether on LinkedIn. I think if you scan that QR code, that should take you to my page if I did everything right. We're also going to have a session over in the next room, I think at 1, where you can find me and my colleagues. Yeah, would love to chat, and Wojciech, the manager of the team that we're setting up here, will be there as well. So yeah, looking forward to connecting with many of you. All right, that's all I have for now. So do we have time for questions, or? Yeah, so if there's a question, I'm happy to answer one.
They're saving it.
All right, we'll get to them at 1. Thanks so much.